Hello students, so today we will start with next chapter of standard 10 science, that is how do organisms reproduce. First let us know that what is reproduction. Reproduction is the process by which an organism gives birth to new young ones. That is, it is the ability to produce new organism. There are basically two types of reproduction. First is asexual reproduction and next is sexual reproduction. Talking about asexual reproduction, in asexual reproduction there is not involvement of any parent, and whereas in sexual reproduction there is involvement of two parents. Further, let us study about the different types of asexual reproduction. First is fission. In fission, the parent body divides into two parts. The word fission means two. फिजन के अंदर जो पेरेंट की बॉडी होती है वो टू पार्ट्स में डिवाइड कर जाती है एंड एवरी पार्ट दैट इज फॉर्म्ड इज नोन एज द डॉटर सेल एंड इट ग्रोज इनटू अ न्यू इंडिविजुअल. Fission is further of two types. First is binary fission and multiple fission. In binary fission, there is division of parent body into two equal and identical daughter cells, and the main thing is that it takes place when all the conditions are favorable. In multiple fissions, many individuals are formed from a single parent, but they are covered in a covering that is known as cyst. And when the conditions become favorable, this cyst, this covering ruptures and the individuals grow into new separate individuals. So multiple fission takes place under unfavorable conditions. Next is spore formation. Spore are the minute structures that are found in the plants. Now these microscopic unicellular reproductive structures germinates to produce new individuals. Talking about fragmentation. Fragment means part of the body. The parent body divide into different parts that are known as fragments, and each fragment grow into a new individual. For example, it takes place in sponges. The next example by which asexual reproduction takes place is budding. So in budding, a bud is formed on the parent body, and when this bud gets mature, it gets detached from the parent body, and this detached bud further grows into a new organism. Talking about vegetative propagation. Vegetative propagation means reproduction by the vegetative parts of a plant. Now, vegetative parts of a plant are those parts which are able to grow and able to reproduce. So, these plants include stem, root, and leaves. Further, let us study the natural methods of asexual reproduction. So, this is basically by propagation by stem in rhizome, banana, bulb, onion, tuber, potato, and propagation by buds that are found on the corner of the leaves that takes place in bryophyllum. Micropropagation or tissue culture is basically the reproduction process that is taking place under controlled conditions in a lab. So production of large number of plants, tissue culture technique, for example, chrysanthemum. In artificial method, the first method also includes cutting. Now what is cutting? In cutting, a small piece, a healthy piece of the stem is cut, or the root is cut, or the leaf is cut, and it is planted into the soil, which grows into a new organism. In layering, a branch of plant is lowered, the lower branch of the plant, that is basically a healthy branch of the plant, is lowered and buried into soil to induce new roots, and which is further cut from the parent body, and the plant grows into a new individual. Talking about grafting. Grafting is a very common method that is opted these days, because in grafting the individual or the new organism that we are getting basically have the properties of two different individuals belonging to the same species. So method of obtaining superior quality plant from two different plants by taking root system of one plant, that is known as stalk, and the shoot system of another plant. The process is known as grafting, and it takes place in mango and apple. Further, you can see the diagrammatic representation that how binary fission takes place in amoeba. Amoeba is a unicellular organism, and under favorable conditions, the body starts invaginating and the nucleus is starting elongating. As you can see in the second stage, the nucleus is elongating and the sides are invaginating inside. Further, it divides into two daughter cells and the nucleus divides into two parts and the cytoplasm divides into two daughter cells also. The next part is fragmentation that takes place in planaria. You can see the body of the parent planaria, and in favorable conditions, the fragments are formed in the body of this parent planaria. This parent planaria is a mature planaria, and each fragment that is formed in mature planaria further grows into daughter planaria, and this is how the number of individuals are increased. Next is vegetative propagation, that is the reproduction that is taking place by the vegetative parts of the plant, for example stem, root and leaves. Here you can see that from the parent plant a healthy stem is cut, and that cut part is basically put into the soil where it gets nutrients from the soil, and under favorable conditions it grows into a new organism. Next is sexual reproduction in flowering plants. So in angiosperms, the reproductive part is known as a flower. Talking about the structure of a flower consists of sepals that are green in color and are basically forming the base. Further, you can see the petals. Now the petals are colorful. The question is that why the petals are colorful? Petals are basically colorful because they attract insects for pollination. Next is the male reproductive part that is known as stamen, and it is also known as androecium. The androecium consists of anther, and next is a filament-like structure. The anther produces pollen grains that carry male gametes. Talking about the female reproductive of a plant, that is carpel and is also known as gynoecium. It consists of the upper part that is known as stigma, which receives the pollen grains after the process of pollination. The middle part is known as style, that is a tube-like structure which leads to a basal swollen part that is known as ovary, which is having ovules. And ovules contain haploid cell, that is the female gamete. How the reproduction takes place in flowers. So the process of reproduction begins from fertilization, and the first part is pollination. What is pollination? Pollination is basically transfer of pollen grain from anther of the plant to the stigma of the plant. Now the pollination is basically of two types. First is self-pollination, and the other part of pollination, that is cross-pollination. In self-pollination, the pollen grains are transferred to the stigma of the flowers that are present on the same plant, or it is the same flower only. Whereas in cross-pollination, the flower belong to the same species, but the flowers are present on two different plants. So pollen grains are transferred from the one part of the plant to the stigma of the flower that is present on the other plant, and that is known as cross-pollination. After pollination, when the pollen grains basically reach the stigma, they germinate and then there develops a tube-like structure that is known as pollen tube. In this pollen tube, two non-motile male gametes develop, and this pollen tube further enters into the ovary, leading to the ovule. This pollen tube basically ruptures the ovary through the opening that is known as micropyle, and through micropyle, these two male gametes are released into the embryo sac of the female reproductive part, that is the ovule. Now, after this, the process of fertilization begins. The process that takes place, the fertilization process that takes place in plants is known as double fertilization. What happens in double fertilization? In double fertilization, when the male gametes are released into the embryo sac, one male gamete fuses with the egg and it forms a diploid cell that is known as zygote, and it is also known as germinative fertilization. Whereas the other male gamete fuses with two polar nuclei and it forms 3N, a triploid structure that is primary endosperm.